Hello and welcome to the Unusual Stories podcast. My name is Wojciech. I'll be your host for today. And before we start, may I just remind you, if you'd like to support this podcast in any way, please feel free to share it with a friend. Maybe click the subscribe button below and share the link on your feed. That's probably the best and most impactful way of promoting my work out there. And if you'd like to support it in any other way, maybe by sending me an email to give me a pat on the back or a suggestion for the next season's books to come, then please follow the link below as well. And if you'd like to support me financially, there's also an option there for a donation. So I'm very grateful for anyone out there who has already supported. This podcast wouldn't be the same without you guys, and I can see the numbers and I can see people sharing this with these ideas with others, so I'm very grateful for that. And here we are. Sorry for my voice, it might be a bit raspy at times. I'm still recovering. Here we are at the end of yet another season, which is surreal feeling. It's funny, I was thinking, what book should I prepare for you for this end of season episode? I've had some ideas, but then since the majority of this season was sort of dedicated to spirituality and religion in a broader sense maybe, but spirituality for sure, and some slight philosophical matters, except for maybe the few books at the very beginning, then it didn't fit for me to do the books that I've initially sort of planned for. And quite frankly, they weren't so planned, and that's why it didn't fit, because I expected the one other book to be finished by now, which I'm still reading, and I didn't want to do this sort of, shortcut of preparing the book before I finish it. I'm enjoying it way too much, so I'll keep it for another time, and it would still not fully sort of fit the spiritual landscape maybe of the books that we've covered. If you look back on the previous 9 episodes, the majority of them are from David Hawkins, because as I promised, I wanted to give you some more works of his and my takes on them. And there's also a few books about sort of philosophy of leadership or philosophy of war, maybe even. But for the most part, they're all concerned with the one's ability to become better at one's own, sort of achievements, maybe development, and also one's own mastering one's own self. And so recently, a friend of mine, one of the new colleagues that I made, or new friends that I've made at my new job, when we were discussing the books that I've been reading, and I shared with him some of the books that I've shared with you already on the podcast, he pointed out that for him, a book that he's been recently reading and he finds it really powerful is the book by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. And funnily enough, even though I've read this book a year ago, I've not actually prepared an episode for you about it, or at least I couldn't find it. If you do find an episode about this book, then please comment below, and that would be quite funny. But I doubt it. I looked through the previous seasons and I tried to figure out, was it really that I did not, yet again, was it really one of those books that I didn't prepare? Because similarly to Thinking Fast and Slow, I thought this book to be so, important, and that I was surprised not to find it in my repertoire already. And so I thought this is a great opportunity for me to review my notes from my previous year and to prepare this book for you as my final book for the season. And since the season was all about spirituality, or at least in majority about spirituality, then ending on a high note with The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle only seemed fair. And so here we are. I've gathered my notes. I've prepared 3 major sort of topics as per usual that we're going to talk about. And of course, I'll have a little invitation for you, and maybe I'll shed a little light on what's to come by the end of the year still, because I've got some plans ready. And so maybe at the end of the episode, I'll share a few. I don't want to share too much, but at the same time, I want to give you a taste of it, so you can then see whether or not it's something worth tuning in or clicking that bell kind of shape button on Spotify, so you can get a notification when the next episode appears. Now, in terms of the book itself, very briefly, I find it to be quite an easy read, and in comparison to others that we've discussed over this season in particular, this is probably one of the shorter ones and one of the lighter ones, if you will. Of course, the topic itself is not so light, and that's only fair. It's majorly focused on sort of spiritual enlightenment, or if you want to call it more layman's terms word, I guess spiritual progress or spiritual adventure of your own. That's a good way to put it, maybe. But in comparison to others, it's definitely one of the shorter and more concise, and also easier to read. It sort of reminds me of a difference between the 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson versus, for example, Maps of Meaning of that same author. 12 Rules for Life was written in a way that anyone can understand, while Maps of Meaning, as much as anyone could understand it, it's a much more difficult, I would say, much more complex book to grasp. And similarly here, we've discussed some ideas from David Hawkins or the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which are not easy. Like, they are entertaining, and certainly they will challenge you in a positive manner, but they're not an easy read to begin with, while The Power of Now might be a good start for you, a good starting point. So if after this episode you feel inclined to try any of these books, and you've not already picked up some from the previous episodes, then maybe The Power of Now is for you, if you want to sort of maybe begin to explore the spiritual domina of the spiritual genre, let's say, in a more easy to read manner, rather than dive deep. It's up to you. I would recommend all of these books. That's why I'm preparing episodes about them. But this one might be for you if you're looking for something easier. Now, I guess let's jump straight to it. The first major topic I would like to talk with you is also the topic which sort of addresses the title of the book itself, right? The book is called The Power of Now, and we should definitely talk about the presence, right? So, and this is going to be a bit counterintuitive, and I'll explain in a second. So, in terms of the quote that I've taken out of the book and I've prepared here for you, we can start with this. Realize deeply that the present moment is all you have. Make the now the primary focus of your life. Now, let's make this a little sort of mind exercise. Imagine for a moment, and bear with me if it doesn't feel right, imagine for a moment that there is no time. Imagine for a moment that time is only perceived by us subjectively, but apart from this being true for our minds to make sense of maybe this experience called life, apart from it, time does not exist. And even if it does, it's somewhat irrelevant, because what the point of realizing that time might not be true is that the only moment you have throughout your life is now, in the sort of true sense. So even though from experience I can anticipate that in 10 minutes I'll be probably done with the first topic and I'll be starting the second one, and according to my timer at the bottom of my screen, I'm around 10 minutes into the podcast itself, so I know 10 minutes passed as I've been talking to you. These seem true, and we have a way to measure them, but the only measurement we actually do, we do in the present, and the only measurement we can anticipate into the future is based on the models, but it's not true in and of itself. So I anticipate the future because I look back to the past, but the only moment when I can actually engage in any of them is the present, which is it seems so obvious sometimes that people I think we underestimate the importance or the impact of considering this as true, because it seems so obvious, right? But at the same time, because we are trained, we have this habitual activity, and we've been going for, years. I've been going for 27 years now, doing certain things in a certain way and knowing that there is a certain amount of days in a year, or hours in a day, or hours in a week, so I can sort of plan. And that's all great. I'll talk about planning in a second. The thing is, though, in terms of the actual true experience of life, the only moment you are experiencing it is now. Okay? So consider that for a moment. Just make yourself aware that even though the past seems true, and it was for you, right? You cannot change the past, and the past won't come. It's gone, it's done. And even though the future seems obvious, and you know that in 2 minutes you'll still be listening to this, and in 20 minutes I'll probably still be waffling away on some other topic, the future in a physical form does not exist either. It's only here and now. And the way I sort of portray it for myself from one of the, I think, documentaries or something that I've encountered was like, if you have a frame from a film, right? From an old school making of a film, like a film frames. So imagine that even though you have those film frames, and here are the past frames, here is the present, and here are the frames going forward, we are in this frame at all times, right? So even though you might sort of expect something to be there into the future, or you remember there was something in the past, it's only here that we can actually experience it. And Eckhart Tolle's whole book is sort of dedicated to empowering us and to making us aware of just how important this now is. Because the only space where you can feel joy, pain, you can suffer, or you can feel gratitude is now. It's not something you can delay. You cannot, I mean, it's funny to talk about this, right? It's quite a challenge to even convey it, but like, you can anticipate that you will be happy into the future, but unless in the now, in the future, you are happy, you're constantly delaying happiness for it to never to appear. And similarly, you can sort of consider that you've suffered in the past, but if every time you remember you suffering in the past, you bring up these emotions of suffering, what you're actually doing is you're suffering now because of some suffering that you've suffered in the past. And similarly to worrying about the future, because we not only delay happiness for the future, but we also tend to bring worry into the now, even though the future has not appeared. Is, we've talked about this risk aversion and stuff. Because of our human experience, we have the tendency to anticipate what can go wrong. But the thing is, the moment I think about a potential accident, let's say, and I bring it into the now to worry about it right now, it's not that I've given it any more true than it is, because it can or cannot happen. But here and now I am suffering the consequences of it actually happening, even though it did not happen, right? So Eckhart Tolle invites us to realize that the now is the only moment we have, and so we should be more aware of how we wish and we do spend this time. How do we want to participate in the now? And by being immersed fully in the now, by allowing yourself to feel whatever is going on right now fully, without thinking about the past or worrying about the future, you are actually living a more fulfilling life, because you're filling this frame with what is in this frame, instead of taking whatever is from the past or whatever is from the future into this frame. And this is such a cliche, but I guess it's worth noting. Ruminating about the past is futile, because you cannot change it. The past is gone, and quite frankly, the way you remember things is not actually how they were. I mean, not how they were from all perspectives, because your memory of your breakup is certainly a different kind of memory than the memory of your loved one, ex-loved one, let's say, of the breakup, which I think is an important thing to note, especially if we're if we're troubled about something, we feel guilty or whatever, don't be so sure that you know what actually happened. You know what happened from your perspective, and that's not necessarily the true happening. Even so, though, since you cannot change it, it's futile, and so you might as well let it go and hear the echo of David Hawkins' book, which we'll talk about in a second, definitely resonates. And then worrying about the future or promising yourself that you will feel happy tomorrow, and now you're miserable because you want to be happy tomorrow, is also quite futile because the future is uncertain. And this is not to say to scare you in any way, but I think it is worth, if this is going to motivate us to feel more alive and grateful and fulfilled and aware, present maybe, in the now, it might be worth noting that one of us could be hit by a bus tomorrow, and that's that, right? Like, of course, touch wood, it's not gonna happen, right? But the point is, you have the now, and cherish it, because it's all you actually have. And this is coming back to this idea of the frame, that the only space you actually engage with in 20 years' time, the only moment you will have is now. 20 years ago, the only moment I had as a little boy was now. And the world has only one moment, and it's now, right? So this is the opening sort of part in terms of maybe beginning to imagine and engage in your life in a way that you would like it to be more of, while avoiding those things that and emotions that you don't necessarily want to bring up more in your life, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I've taken a note here for myself that I just wanted to read to you, because we talk so much on this podcast about planning and being sort of ready for things to happen, and you could argue, after what I've just proposed to you from the power of now, that if we're so concerned about the now, why would we concern ourselves about the future? Like, shouldn't we just engage in all the hedonistic pleasures and simply enjoy the now like there is no tomorrow? Because, as you said, Wojtek, a moment ago, tomorrow may never come. And that's a fair point. The thing is, though, it's not a sustainable strategy, right? Because if you do plan yourself, and I remember one episode, I don't remember which episode it was, but in one episode I actually made this point exactly, that if you do anticipate yourself not to be around for long, fair enough, you do you. But if you have any sense that you might be still alive in 20 or 30 years, or 50, then it's probably beneficial for you to take care of your body, mind, and financial health and your relationships in a way that sort of allows you in the future to also enjoy the benefits of good relationships, health benefits, and financial situation going forward. So I've written here an idea: plan for the future, make choices that empower it, but when it comes down to living, live in the present. And I think that's maybe a good way to summarize this point, that we should not, I think, misunderstand Eckhart Tolle and his work for an invitation to simply live right now as if there is no tomorrow, and sort of you only live once kind of attitude. Rather, we should be aware that the now is all we have, so we enjoy it fully and we immerse ourselves in it fully, while obviously still making the needed provisions to allow yourself to enjoy the now in 20 years in a similarly fulfilling manner. Wonderful. So let's go to the second point, maybe. On the second point, I've written down this idea basically a big part of the book by Eckhart Tolle is explaining to us once again, and this is nothing new for anyone out there who has engaged in any sort of spiritual focused books in the past, this idea of the conflict, let's say, or a sort of an eternal struggle between the ego and the higher self, right? We know this from both religious endeavors and also spiritual works and teachings, that according to Eckhart Tolle, ego is the source of self-esteem and identity. It's sort of what makes the claim that Wojtek is XYZ and he does XYZ, constructed from our personal and social experiences, right? So in a way it's very limited, because it's limited to what we subconsciously and consciously perceive to be our background and our character and so forth. And then the problem with the ego is it thrives on separation and opposition. Like, for the ego to make sense of itself, there has to be the other, right? So me, Wojtek, is in a opposition to you, insert your name. And similarly, us speaking here could be portrayed in opposition or in a separation to them, and you can see it in the discourse of politics or conflicts in all over the world, right? There's always the us and them. There's always the finger pointing of sort of the conflict of it's because of him, her, them that something happened, or our situation is different than your situation, and here is why, X, Y, Z. So this leads quite obviously to conflict and dissatisfaction, because if we are constantly having to reassure ourselves and our difference from the other, then that's what we're looking out into the world to find. And this is bringing back the idea of the paradigm, or the goggles that you might, the filter, if you will, that you might pick up and carry around. That if you act from the ego state only and primarily, then you see the world in sort of a black or white kind of colors, meaning there is a stark contrast between what you think is right and what you think is wrong, between what you think is like you and what you think is not like you, and therefore potentially bad, because that could be a very easy shortcut in thinking, in perception. And therefore, you know, this ego perspective, through this ego perspective, we become very reactive, right? Because if all depends on how I perceive you the moment I meet you, it can only go two ways, according to ego. I either meet you and I instantly consider you to be one of my tribe, or, you know, for whatever reason I resonate with you, or I could consider you the opposite. And therefore, straight away, I go into a conflict sort of a mode. I contrast you against myself. And in a practical sense, this brings up an array of negative emotions, and you can pick and choose whatever you want to, emotions and sort of reactions, right? Because if I react to you the moment I encounter you, first of all, I'm not in charge of my activity, because my activity will, you know, let's say that you go for a walk and you want to have a nice walk. If you're acting from the state, from the level of the ego, then that walk is unlikely to stay positive and calm, because you're likely to encounter someone or something that does not fully resonate with you. It can be a loud dog in the park, or it can be someone that cuts you off on the street. It can be some sort of, I don't know, you could step into shit, for example, on your way. You step into a poo of a dog, and this is not to say that it's negative or it's not negative, but this is not to say that it's not unsuitable to be slightly frustrated about the fact that you stepped into a poo, and potentially you would, even if you did not get aggravated about this, you would potentially clean your shoe, and you would not be too happy about the whole activity. The point here is, though, if you're reliant fully on how your ego reacts to the world, you're likely to be in constant stress and in constant sort of battle challenge between the negatives and the positives, because life is sweet and sour in many ways, right? And if you allow these little and big and awful and beautiful things to pull you in all directions at all times, then you're unlikely to have a peaceful day. Now, in contrast to that attitude, Eckhart Tolle points out the consciousness behind the ego, right? The awareness observer, the higher self, I call it. That's my choice of words, though. Let's say the bigger brother to the ego, right? The older brother, a bit more comfortable with the difficulties of life and with conflicts and stuff. So this consciousness that we have, this awareness that we all have, as we've discussed again and again on in our episodes and from the books that we discussed, this is where peace and connectedness to others come. So in contrast to the ego, which thrives on sort of separation and putting yourself in contrast to other things, ideas, opinions, and events, the higher self, the consciousness, the awareness, thrives on being connected, because it observes everything to be just as it is, just as it should be, without judgment. And this is the part that you strengthen when you start to engage in mindfulness living and in mindfulness exercises, activities, whatever you want to call it. So this is where the Letting Go book and the ideas from David Hawkins are truly resonant to what the Power of Now is suggesting, which, quite frankly, I would say either or is fair to start with. I could imagine this book to be as powerfully impactful to me as Letting Go was, were I to read this one first. I think it's a very good and very similar guide to spiritual growth. So this idea here that the higher self is more concerned about the connectedness and peace is also why, by strengthening this part, we can sort of balance the potentially negative and slightly off-balanced part of our self, which is the ego self. And the easiest way to go about it is to observe your thoughts and emotions as they happen, but allow yourself a space, that few seconds bracket that we've discussed again and again, to not act upon them reactively, rather to choose wisely and without judgment. Because the moment you judge, you're already reacting to whatever happened. So, for example, let's say that a thought appears as I step into that leftover poo of a dog in the park, and my first reaction inside my let's say the emotion that I feel inside is the emotion of disappointment and anger, maybe some sort of frustration. I can observe it and let it pass, or I can just sort of lash out and maybe even say a few swear words or whatever. And one of them is obviously the negative reaction of the ego. One of them is slightly more positive, if you will, more neutral reaction of the higher self. The thing is, though, you might think, okay, well, then I'm gonna observe those emotions, I'm gonna judge them, and then I'm gonna act. The thing is, though, the moment you judge them, you're already leaning towards the ego again rather than the higher self. So the higher self and the ability to be mindful is to also be mindful of the potential biases and judgments that we hold. And the moment you judge your emotions as bad, you've already made an additional layer of conundrum inside of you, as if you're so all-knowing and powerful that you know what's good or bad, and therefore that's where arrogance, for example, plays a part, or pride. And as we've discussed in our previous episodes, which I would definitely recommend, from David Hawkins' books, pride and arrogance are not necessarily the most positive of emotions and character traits to foster within ourselves. So a quote here from Eckhart Tolle for you in regards to this topic is as such: to become free of ego is not really a big job, but a very small one. All you need to do is be more aware of your thoughts and emotions as they happen. So maybe the invitation here from this point is start becoming more aware of emotions and sort of maybe thought patterns as they happen, and you'll know when you are aware before you lash out, and that's when the growth takes place. The moment you start recognizing that you see yourself getting angry before you externalize that anger, is a really exciting and also very empowering feeling to have. This doesn't mean that you're not gonna get mad, but at least it puts you at the wheel of your own, sort of state a bit more. It gives you back the power to choose, and potentially over time it gives you back the power to not have to choose the negative ones. I certainly feel like this from time to time. Now, finally, our third topic for the episode is one about acceptance and surrender. And I literally took a note here before the episode, taking a note that this is letting go reconsidered, basically. And we've already established that it's not far from the letting go in general. So this part in particular, if you've listened to the other 4 episodes about David Hawkins' books, maybe now go get yourself a cup of tea and relax and come back for the invitation at the very end. Now, in terms of the this part, the power of now basically invites us to first and foremost radically accept what happens. Voluntarily take on the challenge of the now. And I'll read the quote for you first, because that might be a good sort of beginning for the topic. Accept, then act. Whatever the present moment contains, accept it as you had chosen it. Always work with it, not against it. And I want to highlight here this part: whatever the present moment contains, accept it as if you had chosen it. As if you had chosen it. And this is basically this radical acceptance. It's what Jordan Peterson talks about in his book 12 Rules for Life, when he says about standing up straight with your shoulders back. Take on the challenge of life voluntarily. And as Eckhart Tolle points out, accept the opportunity or the challenge first, then act. This is something that is reminiscent for me of, there is this idea, and please don't quote me on this, rather look it up, but this is the idea that I've heard again and again being shared by Jordan Peterson in terms of the way traumas would be dealt with by people, and how a clinical psychologist helps a person overcome their fear, for example, is he would always bring up this story that there was let's say a lady who was scared of the elevators, right? And initially she was so scared of elevators that she wouldn't even consider thinking about an elevator. So initially they had to sort of talk a little bit about the elevators, and over time she would close her eyes and he would sort of walk her through the exercise of imagining herself walking up to an elevator and then walking into the elevator and then taking the elevator to go up the next floor or whatever. And then they actually exposed her to an elevator that she just looked at it. Then she looked into it, and over time she walked into it, and then the rest is history. They managed to get her help. But the one important thing that stuck with me from that story is that he pointed out again and again that the most important factor of this is for the people to be exposed to these challenges voluntarily. If you were to push someone who's scared of elevators into the elevator to get them rid of their fear, they are just gonna get traumatized, and that's that. You're just gonna cause them a lot of mayhem and just very negative experience. Whereas if you encourage them, but you give them the choice to do it themselves voluntarily, they not only overcome that fear, but they grow stronger within themselves because of it. And I think this is something that really resonates here on a more pragmatic pragmatically more relevant space, when Eckhart Tolle says that we should accept the moment and all what it contains as if we had chosen it. If you are faced with the tragedy of life, and I have no doubt all of us, unfortunately, it is just so, will at some point, then if you make this distinction of accepting whatever is happening first and then acting, you will be acting out from a much stronger position. You're going to be acting out from the position of courage, which, as you remember from David Hawkins, is the first level of positive sort of power rather than force level of consciousness. The point here is you need to take on the challenge of life and challenge of the now voluntarily. So the next time you have a difficult situation arising, you will be better prepared, because you will remember that you have taken on the challenge voluntarily before and you were able to do it. The biggest challenge to begin with is to become courageous or self-assured enough to even consider taking on challenges voluntarily, right? And with each challenge taken on and conquered, you become stronger and stronger. And over time, there is no limit to that. So I've taken a note here that coming back to the moment earlier, acknowledge the present without judgment and guilt, and there will be no inner resistance to it. So that's the part where the higher self has to take charge, right? You step into this moment as if you had chosen it. You don't judge it to be bad or good. Instead, you make pragmatic, active, meaningful steps to overcome it, whatever that means to you. And I understand and resonate that it's easier said than done, but it's definitely an idea worth striving for, and potentially one of the most powerful ones to really take on in terms of the pragmatic application, practical application of it for your everyday life. Something that just popped into my head right now, and before I wrap up, I wanted to share with you. I'm scared of heights, or I don't know if I was always scared of heights. I'm pretty sure I'm scared of heights since I was like 6 or 7, when my mom, who was scared of heights, sort of made a big scene in front of me when we were on I think a lighthouse. And I think it really scared me. And since then, I'm sort of, I don't like walking up to the edge of a cliff. Like, I have this weird feeling like potentially this is not the best place for me to be. But I know that I'm scared of heights, and therefore I was thinking, well, I'd like to maybe get rid of that fear of heights. And one thing that this and reading Jordan Peterson made me aware of is, if I do choose to voluntarily put myself, for example, in a plane to jump out with a parachute, I'm likely gonna get rid of it quite easily. So that's an exciting and empowering thought to have, right? So finally, in terms of the invitation for you for this week, I would like to echo what we've just discussed. So the next time you have a challenge or a conflict or an unpleasant surprise appearing in your life, take a moment first to make peace with it. Imagine, in a way, like as if you were a fighter walking up to a ring to fight another participant. Even though you might have seen some fights before, even though those guys are about to start bashing one another and potentially cause each other quite a bit of harm, they walk up there and they respectfully bow to one another. They potentially even smile. They, touch gloves or whatever. And I think that's in many ways the accepting of the challenge. You look the dragon, the proverbial dragon, in the eyes. You make peace with this situation, and then you go and do whatever is necessary to get the things done, right? You go to work. So the next time you're faced with a challenge that feels overwhelming, or maybe you'll just have a very frustrating situations at hand that happens this week, take a moment first and really make peace with it. Recognize that whatever it is happening, that's okay. It's probably for the best. And then go at it and see whether that is something that has helped you. Otherwise, feel free to choose any of the other invitations that I've shared with you throughout this episode, and maybe they will be yours to act upon. Now, in terms of the sort of very brief introduction of what's happening in the next few weeks, I'm planning a special mini season of books with about controversial topics. I don't think they should be controversial, but since whatever the world is currently at, and these books can be considered controversial, I thought I'll make a special sort of mini season for it, and I'll make a mark in the title as well, making sure that people know that this might not be a topic, the easiest topic or the least challenging topic to explore. And secondly, I'm gonna have some additional episodes to share with you because I'm rebranding the podcast, and this is the first time I'm mentioning it. So I've chosen a new, slightly different title. My friend and who's a professional designer is creating a logo for me, so that's very exciting. Finally, something new. And so over the next few weeks, I'll also probably have a few episodes that just talk about this as a part of my journey. Maybe for you, if you have your own podcast or you're working on your own stuff and you need a logo, then I'll probably share some thoughts about these and how it did go for me. What are my reflections about it, and I'll also have a big episode announcing it. And that's probably going to be intertwined with the other. So, yeah, we have just about 10 weeks to go in the year. I'll probably not use all of these weeks to make episodes for you. I'll see. My exams are coming up as well, so that's exciting. But, yeah, I'll keep you informed. Just wanted to sort of to drop it here to make a little taster, and I'm very excited to be doing the special episodes about those books. I think they're very meaningful and important books to talk about, even if you don't fully agree with their author's content and so forth. So yeah, exciting times. I hope this episode was worth it and that you've enjoyed yourself. Pardon my slightly off voice. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.